This episode was produced using AI-generated voices and scripting. $50 billion for a text editor. I keep saying it out loud, hoping it'll start making sense.
And it won't, because that's not what the number means. Like, if you're looking at this and going, wow, a code editor is worth 50 billion, you've already lost the plot.
Okay, but hang on. Cursor is literally a fork of VS Code. It's Microsoft's open source editor with an AI layer bolted on. That's what people are paying $50 billion to own a piece of.
Right, and Google is literally a text box with a button. Describing the surface doesn't tell you anything about the value. What Andreessen Horowitz and Thrive Capital are betting on is that Cursor becomes the operating layer for how software gets written, not the editor, the platform. That's a completely different category.
So, walk me through the actual deal here. What do we know?
Andreessen Horowitz and Thrive Capital are co-leading the round. $50 billion valuation. This is Anosphere. That's the company behind Cursor. They were valued at $9 billion in their last round, which was, and nobody's saying this, that was in December 2024. So we're talking about a roughly 5.5x jump in valuation in what, 6 months?
Wait, seriously? 9 to 50 in 6 months?
Yeah, and before that, they raised at $2.5 billion in September. So from September to now, that's a 20x in under a year.
That's insane growth in paper value. What's the revenue picture?
That's the thing. The reporting says Cursor's crossed about 300 million in annualized recurring revenue, which is real. That's not vapor. But 50 billion on 300 million ARR is 160 something x revenue multiple. For context, Salesforce trades at like 8 or 9x. Even Snowflake at its most frothy was maybe 60 or 70x.
So this is priced like a religion, not a company.
It's priced like a platform winner. And I actually think the market's not wrong here. I just think people are confused about what right means in this context.
Meaningless?
Meaning if Cursor actually becomes the default surface through which most professional software gets written, 50 billion is cheap. That's the bet. It's not, is this worth 50 billion today based on current revenue? It's, does this become the next developer platform, in which case you're looking at hundreds of billions eventually.
Okay, but who does that actually help? Because if I'm GitHub, I'm sitting on Copilot, which is embedded in the most popular IDE in the world, VS Code, which, again, Cursor forked from. Microsoft owns the whole stack. How does Cursor win that fight?
That's not what's happening though. Copilot's problem isn't distribution. Copilot's problem is that it's a feature inside someone else's product strategy. Microsoft has to make Copilot work across Word, Excel, Teams, GitHub, Azure, Windows. It's a horizontal AI play. Cursor only has to make coding better. That focus is the entire advantage.
So you're saying Microsoft's breadth is actually a weakness here?
Massive weakness. Every time Microsoft ships a Copilot improvement in VS Code, they have to think about how it interacts with their Azure positioning, their GitHub licensing, their enterprise contracts. Cursor just ships. They can re-architect the whole editing experience around AI because they don't have a legacy product to protect.
That's a fair point. But, and I keep coming back to this, they forked VS Code. They're building on top of Microsoft's open source project. What happens when Microsoft decides to just close the gap?
I mean, they've been trying. Copilot's been out for, what, 3 years now? And Cursor's still eating their lunch with developers. The gap isn't closing, it's widening. Because the product velocity at Cursor is, it's just a different gear. They ship their tab feature, the multi-line autocomplete, the inline chat, the codebase-aware context. All of this while being a tiny team compared to Microsoft's army.
Come on. Microsoft has infinite resources.
And that's exactly the problem. Infinite resources, infinite priorities. Cursor has like a couple hundred people max, and every single one of them wakes up thinking about how to make AI coding better. At Microsoft, the VS Code team is one of 50 teams that matter, and Copilot is stretched across a dozen product surfaces.
Alright, let me push on the other side then. JetBrains. They've got IntelliJ, PyCharm, the whole suite. Deep enterprise penetration, real language intelligence that's been built over 20 years. Where are they in this?
In trouble. And I say that as someone who's used IntelliJ for years and genuinely thinks their code understanding is best in class. The problem is their AI story is bolted on. They launched their AI assistant and it's fine. It's competent. But competent doesn't win in a market where the frontier is moving this fast.
And they've got a different business model problem too, right?
Huge problem. JetBrains charges per seat for IDE licenses. That's their whole business. If the IDE becomes commoditized, and AI is absolutely commoditizing the editor layer, then their pricing power evaporates. They can't charge $300 a year for IntelliJ when Cursor gives you a better AI experience on top of a free VS Code base for $20 a month.
$20 a month. That's the Cursor Pro price?
Yeah, and there's a business tier at 40. But the point is, even at those prices, the value proposition has shifted. Developers aren't paying for the editor anymore. They're paying for the AI. The editor is just the shell.
That's the whole game right there, isn't it? The editor is the shell. The AI is the product.
Exactly. And that's why the 50 billion number is a platform bet, not a tool bet. If Cursor is right and the revenue trajectory suggests they might be, then the IDE as a category just got subsumed. It's not which editor do you use, it's which AI coding platform do you use. The editor is incidental.
So here's my counterintuitive take on this. I actually think the 50 billion valuation is bad for Cursor
Oh, interesting. Go.
because it paints a target on them that's impossible to ignore. At 9 billion, you're a hot startup. At 50 billion, you're an existential threat. Every big player, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, now has to respond to you specifically. You've announced yourself as the thing to kill.
I actually don't disagree with that completely. But the flip side is that 50 billion also gives them a war chest. This round probably includes a significant primary component. They can hire aggressively, spend on compute, lock in model partnerships. Evaluation is a weapon, not just a target.
But the pressure on growth expectations at 50 billion is
Brutal, yeah. You need to grow into that number or you're WeWork.
right. And the AI coding space is getting crowded fast. You've got Windsurf, which Cognition's been pushing. There's Augment Code, Poolside, a bunch of.
None of them are Cursor though. Like, none of them have the developer love. And developer love is the moat. It's the only moat that matters in tools, not enterprise contracts, not lock-in, not bundling. If developers love your thing, they'll fight their procurement team to buy it. That's what Cursor has.
Okay, but you said something 10 minutes ago that I want to come back to. You said the frontier is moving really fast. Doesn't that mean Cursor's advantage could evaporate just as quickly? Like, if the models get good enough, does the editor layer even matter?
That's the best bear case against Cursor, and honestly, it keeps me up at night on their behalf. Because, yes, if coding becomes fully agentic, you're just describing what you want and an AI builds it end to end, then the IDE is irrelevant. You don't need a text editor if nobody's editing text.
And that's not some far off thing. Devon's trying to do it. Replic's agent mode is trying to do it. Claude can Samus. Assistant Commander Waitlet's agent mode is trying to do it. Replic's agent mode is trying to do it. Claude can.
Right. But here's where I'd push back on the panic. We've been hearing developers are obsolete in 2 years since GPT-4 launched. And what's actually happened is developers are more productive with better tools. The agentic stuff is real, but it's way further from replacing the IDE workflow than the demo videos suggest.
Famous last words.
Maybe, but the $50 billion bet is essentially that the transition period, the period where AI assists human developers rather than replacing them, is long enough and lucrative enough that Cursor can establish itself as the dominant platform. And then if it does go fully agentic, Cursor evolves into the orchestration layer.
That's a lot of ifs.
Every venture bet at this scale is a lot of ifs. But Andreessen Horowitz isn't dumb. Thrive Capital isn't dumb. Thrive is Josh Kushner's fund. They were early in OpenAI. They've been in the generative AI space from the beginning. They're not pricing this off vibe.
Aren't they, though? 160x revenue multiple is vibes with a spreadsheet.
Ah, I mean, look, the growth rate matters. If you're going from 300 million to a billion in ARR in the next 12 months, which is not crazy given the trajectory, then suddenly you're at a 50x forward multiple, which is aggressive but not insane for a category-defining AI company.
Is 300 to a billion in 12 months realistic?
They went from essentially nothing to 300 million in about 2 years. And enterprise adoption is just starting. Most of the revenue so far is individual developers and small teams. When you start getting Fortune 500 deployments at scale, and they're working on that, the revenue jumps get non-linear.
That's where GitHub has them beat, though. Enterprise sales. Microsoft knows how to sell to CIOs. Cursor's selling to developers who put it on their credit card.
For now. And this is where the fundraise matters. You raise at 50 billion, you can build out an enterprise sales org. You can hire the people who know how to navigate procurement at Goldman Sachs or whatever. The money solves the enterprise problem if the product is already good enough. And it is.
I want to talk about what this means for the broader market. Because if Cursor's worth 50 billion, that reprices everything. Like, what does this say about the value of GitHub?
Oh, this is the part that's fascinating and nobody's talking about it. Microsoft paid $7.5 billion for GitHub in 2018. GitHub now has Copilot, which is, by all accounts, their biggest growth driver, and a startup that forked their free editors worth 6+ times what they paid for all of GitHub.
Oof.
Yeah, now GitHub is obviously worth way more than $7.5 billion today. It's probably worth 80, 100 billion as part of Microsoft. But the fact that Cursor alone is in that conversation, as an independent company with 300 million in revenue against GitHub's 2 billion plus, that tells you how much the market is pricing the AI native advantage.
So, the market is saying being AI native is worth more than having 100 million developers on your platform.
In terms of growth premium, yes. And I think that's actually correct. Distribution advantages decay faster than people think when there's a genuine product quality gap. We saw it with Slack versus Teams. Oh wait, Teams won that one. Bad example.
Ha, yeah. Microsoft's distribution crushed Slack. So why doesn't the same thing happen here?
Because developers aren't the same as enterprise knowledge workers. Developers choose their tools. This is a profession where people have literal religious wars over tabs versus spaces. They care about their tools more than any other professional class. You can't force a developer onto a worse coding tool. They'll quit first.
That's overstated. Plenty of developers use whatever IT gives them.
The average developer, sure. But the best developers, the ones writing the most critical code at the most important companies, they absolutely choose their tools. And those are Cursor's users. That's the way.
Okay, here's my second contrarian take, and I think it's the more important one. I think this valuation actually tells us that the AI investment bubble is specifically in the application layer now, not just in foundation models.
Explain.
For the last 2 years, all the insane valuations were in foundation models. OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI. And the application layer companies were supposed to be the boring ones. Lower margins, commodity risk, dependent on whatever model provider they use. But Cursor at 50 billion says the market's decided that the application layer can be just as valuable. And I think that's wrong.
Why wrong?
Because Cursor doesn't own its models. They use GPT-4, Claude, whatever's best at the moment. If Anthropic or OpenAI decided to build a competitor tomorrow,
They already have. OpenAI has Canvas. Anthropic has Claude Artifacts. Google has
right, exactly. So the model providers are already moving down the stack. What stops them from shipping Claude Code Editor and eating Curse's lunch?
product taste. I'm serious. Building a great model and building a great developer experience are completely different competencies. OpenAI tried to build a consumer product with ChatGPT and it works, but it's not beautiful. It's functional. Cursor is, and I don't say this lightly, Cursor is the best developer tool I've used in 20 years. The UX decisions, the way it integrates suggestions, the way it handles context, that's not something a model lab can replicate by bolting an editor onto their API.
You're basically saying the moat is taste.
The mode is taste plus speed of iteration plus developer trust. And yeah, that sounds flimsy, but Apple's mode is taste. That's worked out okay.
Apple also has hardware lock-in and an ecosystem that.
And Cursor has workflow lock-in. Once your whole team's prompt library, your code-based context, your AI conversation history is in Cursor. Switching costs are real. Not infinite, but real.
That's an interesting point, actually. The switching cost isn't the editor, it's the accumulated AI context.
That's exactly it. And nobody's saying this. The moat in AI tools isn't the model or the interface. It's the learned context. Cursor knows your code base, your patterns, your team style. That's the lock-in. That's what makes the 50 billion make sense.
Okay, I want to zoom out for a second. If we take this valuation at face value, what's the message to every other enterprise software company? Because if Cursor can get to 50 billion in basically 2 years,
The message is If your product can be meaningfully improved by AI and you haven't done it yet, someone else will do it for you. And they'll do it as a startup and they'll be valued at more than you within 24 months. That's the terrifying part for incumbents.
Which incumbents should be most scared? Beyond the obvious, JetBrains, GitHub.
Atlassian, honestly, if AI can transform how code gets written, it can transform how projects get managed, how bugs get tracked, how documentation gets maintained. The entire developer toolchain is up for grabs. Cursor proved that a focused AI native startup can outrun a $1 trillion company in their own backyard. That playbook applies everywhere.
But you said earlier that developer love is the moat. Not every category has that same dynamic. Project management isn't a religious war. People just use whatever.
There. The coding tool space is uniquely suited to this kind of disruption because the users are technical, opinionated, and willing to switch. But the valuation signal still matters. It tells every VC fund the AI native challenger in every software category. The multiples justify it,
Which creates a bubble.
which creates a bubble. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. A lot of these AI native challengers are going to fail. Most of them, but the ones that win will win so big that the portfolio math works. That's the whole venture model.
So we've got Cursor at 50 billion, OpenAI at 300 billion, Anthropic at what was the last number?
60-ish billion last I saw.
Cursor at 50, Anthropic at 60. A coding tool is worth almost as much as the company that builds Claude.
When you put it that way, it sounds insane. But Cursor has revenue growing faster than Anthropic did at the same stage. And they're not burning billions on training compute. Their margins are probably significantly better because they're arbitraging other people's models.
Until those model providers raise prices.
Prices are going down, not up. Inference costs have dropped by like 90% in the last 18 months. That's a tailwind for Cursor, not a headwind.
Okay, last thing. If you had to make a bet, does Cursor justify 50 billion in 5 years? Or does this become one of those cautionary tales we reference on this show in 2029?
I think, and I'm genuinely uncertain here, which is rare for me. I think the most likely outcome is that Cursor either becomes worth 200 billion or gets acquired for less than 50. There's no middle path. Either they're the platform or they're a feature that somebody bought.
That's not an answer.
It's the honest answer. The binary outcome is the point. That's what 50 billion at this stage means. The investors aren't pricing a base case. They're pricing the right tail. And if the right tail hits, the return is generational.
And if it doesn't hit, a lot of LPs just bought a very expensive text editor.
A forked text editor. Don't forget that part.
A forked $50 billion text editor. What a time.